The great civilization of ancient Egypt, with its dramatic spectacle and mystery, has always fascinated me. I've been travelling the country to explore some of the intriguing stories that have emerged from this historic land. In this programme, I'm following in the footsteps of Howard Carter, tracing the life of the man who discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. Here, in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, this spectacular collection of treasure comes from the tomb of the Pharaoh Tutankhamun, and has come to symbolise the greatness of ancient Egypt. But it's here only thanks to the sheer tenacity of the renowned archaeologist Howard Carter, who in 1922, after all others had given up, pushed on to discover the tomb of the little-known Pharaoh. Howard Carter made this amazing discovery against all the odds. He's always intrigued me. He now, of course, is really only known in association with the treasure of Tutankhamun, but in fact he made a major contribution to archaeology. Indeed, from the moment he arrived in Egypt, he started to question and change the way in which archaeology was carried out. But the life of Howard Carter holds a mystery that I want to explore. What's astonishing is that Carter didn't get any official recognition from Britain. Didn't get any of the honours he so richly deserved. Really extraordinary. What was it about this man that made him achieve so much, yet receive so little from his own countrymen? One clue is offered by his childhood and by the strange story that brought him to Egypt in the first place. What I find most surprising about Carter's childhood is that he had almost no education, and he was a real loner. He was a sickly child, was sent away to live with his maiden aunts in rural Norfolk. From what we know, he had few friends here, and I suspect became a self-reliant young man, perhaps triggering in him a sense of being an outsider, something that lasted all his life. But it's Carter's rudimentary education that astonishes me. He left school altogether at 15, showing none of the academic aptitude that would later bring him such fame. In fact, he never took an exam in his life. But he did have a talent for painting and drawing, especially the local countryside and wildlife. Norfolk is probably where Howard Carter would have stayed, if it wasn't for the magical attraction of a stately home nearby. Didlington Hall was where Carter saw something that would trigger a lifelong passion. Here, Lord and Lady Amherst had assembled the finest private collection of Egyptian objects in Britain, and Carter became entranced and inspired by what he saw of this ancient art. Then he got an astonishing break. Lady Amherst suggested he join an expedition she was funding to Egypt. He was to use his artistic talents to record the art on the walls of the tombs that were being excavated. So suddenly, at the age of 17, Carter found himself setting sail for far-off Egypt. I'm following his route down the Nile to a place called Beni Hassan. Carter, it seems, had arrived at just the right moment. The late 19th century was a boom time for archaeologists in Egypt. Tombs were being discovered, temples excavated and recorded, and much of the work was paid for by rich amateurs or English aristocrats. They would fund archaeologists to come here, pay for excavators to work on their pet projects. And this, of course, is exactly how young Carter found himself here in Egypt in 1891. And can you imagine what this young chap must have felt? How thrilling, this 17-year-old, poorly educated, from rural Norfolk, suddenly being in this exotic world of Egyptian archaeology. I've come to these rock-cut tombs at Beni Hassan to see where Carter started work and where, right from the start, he'd want to challenge the way things were done. His first task was to record wall paintings. And what paintings! The young Carter, already gripped by Egyptian art, must have been overcome with excitement when he entered this tomb. The scheme of paintings is so complete on all four walls. It shows the earthly delights and achievements of a local governor. We see him fishing, hunting, receiving tribute. Now, Carter had been employed as a tracer, paid £50 a year. And a tracer's job was simply put a piece of tracing paper over the image to be recorded and then copy it. And that's it, basically. Once it's been filled in, it ends up looking like this. Pretty crude. Just a black and white image silhouette. All the details there, but rather robbed of life. You can see that if you compare this tracing with the wall painting it's traced from. Full of colour and texture and life and meaning. And for Carter, with his love of Egyptian art, this sort of arid approach simply wasn't good enough. So, at the age of 17, he began his mission to raise the standards by which Egyptian art was recorded. Here, what we can see are some charming watercolours that he produced of some of the paintings on the walls. And I have copies of them, and this was really to play to his strengths, because he was a very talented artist, and he loved recording natural life. And this bird, I believe, is somewhere in front of me. Yes, there he is, perching up there in this scene. And here's another one, up there, yes. These little creatures are being, I'm afraid, hunted by the owner of this tomb, who's up there, sort of poking at them with a big stick, one of his worldly delights. The longer Carter spent in Egypt, the more sophisticated his artwork became. In the archives, I tracked down this stunning original watercolour, painted just 4 years after he arrived in Egypt. It must have really caught the eye of the archaeological community. He was in his early 20s when he made it, in 1895. It shows an image of Horus. It's a wonderful piece of work. It shows many things about Carter. It shows how meticulous he was as an observer. It shows the main image absolutely in its correct context. The hieroglyphs, some removed. It shows the cracks on the wall. So one gets from this the sense that he's observing the photographic precision, not an emotional interpretation, an accurate rendering of the thing of beauty, drawing as a scientific exercise. In a sense, he's pioneering. He's on the cutting edge of the way Egyptian art was being documented in the late 19th century. Carter's obsession with precision and accuracy would have been a good start for someone with ambitions to be an archaeologist. And he was soon to get his first lesson from a real master. A little south of the tombs at Beni Hassan is the site of the ancient city of El Amarna. It's the desolate plain where Carter made his first steps towards his future career. At the time, there was a thriving dig here, led by the pioneering archaeologist Flinders Petrie. Petrie's philosophy was that every object on an ancient site, however small, could hold vital clues and should be recorded. It was a far more scientific approach than was common at the time. Carter came here to collect objects of the Amhersts back in Norfolk, but significantly, he was watching and learning the way Petrie ran an excavation. But the meticulous Carter soaked up Petrie's painstaking techniques, and they were the key to his later great success. Carter's trail led me further south to Luxor, the site of the old city of Thebes. It's where Carter, still only 19 years old, got the chance to bring together his art and his growing passion for archaeology. It was here, at the magnificent mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bakri. When Carter arrived as a site artist, the place was still half buried. But what eventually emerged was a spectacular monument. Carter's job was to oversee the recording of the ancient art as it emerged from the rubble. But he soon demonstrated his newly learned knowledge of archaeology. Gradually, Carter earned the respect of the authorities, taking on increasing responsibility. He ended up, after 6 years, almost running the whole excavation. Deir el-Bakri was Carter's big break as an archaeologist. At the age of 25, this uneducated man had learned his profession on the job. And that led to another big step on his road to fame. He was offered the job of Chief Inspector in the Egyptian Antiquities Service. It really had been an extraordinary and rapid rise for the Norfolk schoolboy. He now supervised many of the ancient sites in Egypt, including the great temples at Luxor and the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And he had authority over older and more experienced archaeologists. Some no doubt resented this, something that may have added to Carter's sense of being an outsider. But his success was not to last. His obsessive streak that made him a painstaking artist and archaeologist also made him dangerously inflexible, and this led to a huge row with his employers. One afternoon in 1905, at the site of the Great Step Pyramid at Saqqara, a group of drunken French tourists were causing a scene. So Carter had them thrown out. It caused a major diplomatic incident with the French. Carter was ordered to apologise, but he refused, and after months of wrangling, he resigned from his beloved job. It caused considerable embarrassment to the British establishment and didn't do Carter's reputation any good. It was a bad time for Carter. Really very little details known about his life at this period. He seems to have spent days wandering around the back streets of Luxor, looking at stalls like these, chatting to people. Really, he had no direction. Obviously must have been very depressed. There were no obvious employers for him. Old sponsors like Lord Amherst, well, he'd gone bankrupt. And potential new employers, well, they didn't seem to be interested. They rather shunned Carter. So he became a gentleman dealer, really, buying and selling antiquities. All a bit, I suppose, embarrassing for him, a bit of a sort of disgrace. But he had his art to fall back on, his artistic talent. He made watercolours, drawings of famous locations, ancient buildings, and sold them. Didn't make him a fortune, but it certainly sort of provided him with a reliable and sort of reasonable income. For 4 long years, Carter was almost an outcast from the world of Egyptian excavation. But then came a turning point that will reverse his fortune and lead to the biggest archaeological success of the 20th century. This is the hotel in Luxor where Carter met the fabulously wealthy Lord Carnarvon, who was to become his new patron and change his life. Caught on camera, Carter, on the right, clearly struck up a rapport with the aristocrat and began to adopt some of his style. The two men worked together for years in various parts of Egypt, but with only modest success. But then, in the Valley of the Kings, the burial ground for so many pharaohs of ancient Egypt, Carter and Carnarvon became more and more convinced that they could find the tomb of Tutankhamun that so many others had sought and missed. As the search for the missing tomb went on, it's fascinating to realise that it was Carter's less attractive characteristics, his stubborn tenacity, his obstinacy, that led to eventual triumph. In the summer of 1922, Carnarvon wanted to abandon the search. Carter wouldn't give in and persuaded him to finance one more season of digging. Carter systematically explored the unexcavated sections of the valley, and within a few weeks the world knew Carter's hunch had been right. Walking here, it's easy to understand why the tomb of Tutankhamun was hidden for so long, why it was so hard to find. The entrance to his tomb is right in front of me, now covered by this flat concrete roof, the entrance being just about here. Behind me is a later tomb to Ramesses VI, and when that was dug, obviously lots of limestone chippings and spoil would have been cascading right down here, utterly burying, obscuring Tutankhamun's tomb. It's thrilling now to retrace Carter's footsteps. Golly, this is it. This is where it happened, that magical moment where Carter found the entrance to the tomb. Things have been tidied up a bit since his time, but nevertheless still very exciting. And down these few steps is the entrance and the tomb itself. This is the first door where Carter found the seals intact. He then started to remove the rubble and go down the descending passage as I am now. Carter reached the second door, here it is, also filled with rubble plastered over, seals intact. Goodness me, this is exciting. Well, he then made a little hole here, I suppose hoping against hope they wouldn't see a sea of devastation. Looked through this little tunnel and saw something that made him turn back to Carnarvon standing up there and say, I can see wonderful things. He realised the tomb had not been pillaged by robbers in antiquity. Much survived. He saw in front of him a series of great ritual couches, gilded, animal heads, chests down there, a great treasury of artefacts, bits of chariots all around. And over here, he came in, there was a wall since removed, a rubble wall, dividing this, the antechamber, from the burial chamber. And here we see the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun with one of the coffins inside it. Of course, in that coffin is the young pharaoh's body. This was the first royal tomb from ancient Egypt ever to be found intact, virtually untouched by tomb robbers. Carter must have been thrilled indeed. Yet, when I tracked down his diary for 1922, I was surprised by its matter-of-fact tone. And here we have it, the 4th of November, first steps of tomb found. This is a moment that he realises he's onto something. Over the page, on the 5th of November, discovered tomb under tomb of Ramesses VI. Investigated same and found seals intact. Getting to the 23rd of November, Lord Carnarvon arrives. On the 25th, opened first doors. Incredible moment. And the next day, yes, here we have it, the 26th, opened second doorway. And this great event, the greatest event in the history of archaeology, really, certainly of the 20th century, is recorded in very spare detail in this little book. It's strange reading, really, lacking in emotion. I suppose this portrayal of this great event, in this rather detached way, is a portrait of the man himself. Whatever his feelings about the discovery, we can be sure that Carter was soon very aware of the hard slog ahead. Clearing the tomb of the hundreds of objects and preparing them for the trip downriver to the Cairo Museum would be for Carter almost a life sentence. Everything we see today owes its beauty, if not its survival, to the care taken by Carter and his team. Such as this stunning golden throne, with its wonderful image showing Tutankhamun and his wife. It's no surprise to discover that the meticulous Carter kept notes of everything he found. But when I looked at his original records, I was amazed by the volume of detail. There's a full written description, and pictures too. This is a set of drawings of the throne by Carter himself, and characteristically meticulous, absolutely lovely, annotated drawings, each component labelled, revealing what it's made out of, the components, materials, wood overlaid with gold. And in conjunction with the drawings are photographs. Lovely use of photography. The throne shown various angles, details, again annotated, revealing the materials it's made of again, confirming the drawings. Fantastic piece of work, this. When you consider that Carter produced packs of cars like this for every object, hundreds of objects, you can then begin to understand how this project took over his life. The joy of this tremendous discovery was soon tainted for Carter. He was a solitary man. He wasn't used to working with a large team, and he now needed a large team to work with him on this great discovery, to catalogue, to analyse, even just to move the objects. And that was difficult for him. He couldn't work with people who didn't work as he worked, and very few people worked like he worked. That was, one of the disappointments, I suppose. But the biggest thing was his fallout with Lord Carnarvon. The trouble was, having funded the search for the tomb, Carnarvon expected something in return. Traditionally, the finds from an archaeological dig would be shared between the sponsor of the excavation and the state. But with an intact royal tomb like this one, the Egyptian authorities wanted to keep everything. Carter supported this view and disagreed with Carnarvon. He believed this was such an important find that Carnarvon should give up a claim to any share of the treasure. It was clear that the two men were moving apart. This must have been a very difficult time for Carter. On one hand, this great discovery, making him internationally famous. On the other hand, the collapse of relationships with old friends, particularly, of course, Carnarvon. So Carter was a man more isolated, more alone. And that feeling must have deepened just a few months later when Carter lost his friend and patron for good. In the spring of 1923, Carnarvon travelled upriver to Aswan, where he went sailing with his daughter and some friends. It was to be Lord Carnarvon's last holiday. Within a couple of weeks, Carnarvon was dead, just 4 months after the tomb had been opened. He'd been bitten by a mosquito, and the bite had become infected, and he died of blood poisoning and pneumonia. The suddenness of the death led to wild speculations, fueled by the fact that it is said back in England, Carnarvon's dog dropped dead at the same time as his master died. Was his tomb in fact cursed? Was Carnarvon being punished for his role in disturbing the rest of the Pharaoh? This kind of superstition only increased the whirlwind of interest in Tutankhamun. Tut-mania, even Egypt mania, was sweeping the world, embracing everything: show business, fashion, even architecture. But Carter was suspicious of all the publicity. I think he found it a distraction from his work in the tomb. He became irritable and was picking fights with everyone, even the Egyptian authorities. Eventually they closed him down, banning him from the tomb for nearly a year. I was saddened to discover how once again Carter's cantankerousness had separated him from his life's work. It was not until the autumn of 1925, 3 years after he discovered the tomb, that he was able to open the sarcophagus. Finally, Carter came face to face with the mummified body of the 19-year-old Pharaoh. The body of Tutankhamun, still in this coffin, remains a focus of intense interest. It can tell us, we believe, much about his life, how he died, indeed maybe reveal whether he was in fact murdered, as many now speculate. These are all questions that we know intrigued Carter, but ironically, the removal of the body from the coffin by Carter destroyed much crucial evidence.
The remains were firmly set in hard resin, and Carter had to break the body apart to remove it. This treatment, typical of the time, has made it harder to work out how the young king died. But over the years, several attempts have been made. In the 1960s, when the body was X-rayed, damage to part of the skull raised the suspicion that a violent blow had killed him. But the idea was dismissed by more detailed later scans. Whatever investigations are carried out, it seems the death of Tutankhamun will remain as mysterious as it was for Carter. By 1932, after 10 years of work, Howard Carter had finished clearing the tomb. Everything had gone, save the king's body. The tomb of Tutankhamun is the only one out of 26 royal burials in the valley in which the occupant still remains. But now Carter's job was over, and he must have felt a real sense of anticlimax. Tutankhamun was a triumph that was hard to follow.
In the years after the opening of the coffin, Carter felt less and less comfortable in Egypt. The authorities took over the running of Tutankhamun's tomb, and I suppose in a way Carter felt he'd lost his baby. The old days were past, for him anyway. I suppose the romance of Egypt had gone. He stayed on a bit. He used to take tours around the tomb, and then in 1935 he decided to go home to England.
Back here, Carter's health deteriorated. He had never married, and he seemed to have lived a rather solitary life.
Carter died in March 1939 before he managed to publish a full account of his great discovery, which was ironic, really, for a man dedicated to documenting everything. And he's buried here in Putney Vale Cemetery. So why wasn't Carter honoured in this land for his extraordinary achievement? Well, maybe the answer is partly to do with his humble birth. He was self-educated. The world of archaeology was becoming increasingly academic, so a bit of intellectual snobbery at work. But he was also a very difficult character, ruffled many feathers, a bit of a loner, not very clubbable, not sort of man that could be easily accommodated within the British establishment. So no honours for Carter, no statue. His only memorial is his own grave, and here it is. Carter discovered the most famous tomb in history, but all he gets is this very simple headstone. I feel there's a great injustice here. He was a great man and does deserve a better, more public memorial.
But Carter's legacy is still with us. His huge contribution to the science of archaeology and the glorious reminders of ancient Egypt that he discovered 3,300 years after they'd been buried. Next time, I'm on the trail of the rebel Pharaoh, Akhenaten, and his renowned wife, Nefertiti.